Hi, my name is Paul Swanson. I'm the Director of Digital Learning at Stanford American International School in Singapore. I just wanted to take a little time to share with you some of the work that we've been doing with coaching in terms of digital learning here at Stanford, and a system that we're calling Coaching by Design. This began last year when I was new here at Stanford. And in working with my team, one of the central questions that we were grappling with was, as a digital learning team, how do we develop and improve our practice? There are a lot of different coaching models out there, and I was familiar with some of them to varying depths. But we were looking for something that speaks to digital learning coaching in particular. How do we get better at the deep integration work that we want to be doing with teachers individually or in teams? How do we improve our practice and learn how to do this more effectively? So during this time, I came across a type of coaching model that was suggested by a friend called the Dynamic Learning Project. And the Dynamic Learning Project began about 2 or 3 years ago. A friend of mine was the former director of the project. And it was a collaboration between 3 different groups, between the EdTech team, which does PD work related to Google and other things, EduPromise, which does research and different kinds of investigations, mostly in the US, and then Google itself. And so they ran this project for a couple of years, and they found that it was so successful that they actually have rebranded it now to Google Certified Coaching. So that's what I'm going to take you through today in about 20 minutes, help you see what is this Google Certified Coaching, and not just that, but more specifically, how can you take some of the elements, the key elements of Google Certified Coaching, and then root them in the fabric and the culture of your school? Because one of the things that we found was that many of the elements as part of this certified coaching model already existed in one shape or form at the school, at Stanford. And rather than introducing something new, if we could connect it to things that we were already doing, then it would become more authentically a part of the school. So I'm going to minimize my screen so you can see the full piece of this. Okay. So what are the key elements of this Google Certified Coaching, formerly known as Dynamic Learning Project? There are 6 key pieces that I've identified. The first is design, focus, measuring, investigate, implement, and reflect. And you can think of these as the 6 verbs of Google Certified Coaching. So let's start with design. And this really connects to the notion of design thinking. Now at Stanford, we've already been looking at design thinking, and we've taken from IDEO, one of the most famous design companies in the world, the company that designed the mouse. In one of their online courses, they define design thinking as a process for creative problem solving that includes empathy, human-centeredness, ideation, and experimentation. So what does design thinking have to do with coaching? Well, the Dynamic Learning Project introduced this 5-step design thinking model. And this is based on some of the work of Jenny Magera, a tech coach and an author coming from the US. So the 5 steps that she has identified are to identify the focus of your work with the teacher, to investigate strategies, primarily pedagogic strategies, to select a strategy as well as tools to help with that strategy, implement it, and then finally at the end to reflect. So this is essentially a design cycle, but there are lots of design cycles. You may have heard of this 3-part design cycle: think, make, improve. This is a design cycle that a colleague of mine from Vietnam introduced, and she found worked really well with elementary school kids. So this is a 3-step design cycle. There's also a 4-step design cycle, the MYP design cycle. Stanford is an IB school. We use the MYP in grades 6 through 10, the middle years program. And there are 4 key pieces to this: inquiring and analyzing, developing ideas, creating the solution, and evaluating. Then there's also a 5-step cycle from like the Stanford D School, standing for Design School. This is perhaps the most famous of all of the design cycles. And this one really emphasizes empathizing with your clients at the beginning of the process. But all of these cycles have very similar feel, very similar elements in them about connecting, defining your problem, generating some ideas and solutions, doing it, making it better, iterating, so on and so forth. So what we decided to do was take our school design cycle. Stanford had adopted the MYP design cycle as our school cycle. And we took a look at how that connected with this 5-step Google coaching cycle from the Dynamic Learning Project. And what we did was we created a 4-step coaching by design cycle. So these 4 steps map 1-to-1 on the 4 steps of the design cycle. So instead of inquiring and analyzing, we're focusing on a goal, which is also that first step of the Google coaching cycle. Developing ideas, well, we're investigating strategies, teaching strategies, which is the same as steps 2 and 3 of the Google cycle. Creating the solution becomes implementing and improving. And evaluating, reflecting, turns into reflect on experience. So when we're talking about this coaching process with teachers, now we don't have to introduce a whole new design cycle to them, but we can frame this in terms of the design cycle that many of them are already familiar with. Now, the next 4 or so steps are largely drawn from that cycle. So the beginning is focus on a goal. There are 3 that we identified. The first one, three variations of this we identified. The first one is taken from the Google coaching cycle, which are teacher-based goals, but we also expanded into other types of goals: student-centered goals and strategically planned goals. So let me break those down for you a little bit here. So teacher-based goals, this comes directly from a book called Courageous Adventures by Jenny McGarrah. Again, Jenny McGarrah is one of the thought partners with the Google Certified Coaching, and they draw on her book here in some of their coaching materials. And she describes a sort of a fun process, a way of identifying what challenges teachers may be encountering. And Jenny calls this the Gripe Jam. And she'll start off by giving some examples of different types of challenges that teachers may be facing. And then in different places where they may be encountering them, whether at school or at home, in the parking lot, et cetera, et cetera. Then she has, I think, 4 steps in her protocol. The first, they just start listing out all of the challenges that they're facing and putting them on sticky notes. Now, these could be digital sticky notes, these could be physical sticky notes, or depends on the situation. And you can do this with a couple of teachers, one teacher, an entire auditorium full of teachers. The key piece here is the ordering. So first, they sort it in a line from least frustrating to most frustrating. Then she has the teachers move them up and down depending on how many people are affected. You can see where this is going. So she's looking at different dimensions of these challenges to see which are the ones that the teachers really would benefit the most from focusing on. So we're going to go with the most frustrating challenges that affect the most people, and this is where they break off into a third dimension here, the z-axis, if you will, circling the problems that they're most passionate about solving. So finding a problem that is frustrating, affects lots of people, and that they want to help fix. And these are the most likely candidates to be focused on in this particular problem-finding protocol. But there are other ways of figuring out a focus as well. And I wanted to make it more than just these teacher-based, because one of the advantages of this is that it's a direct challenge that the teacher is dealing with right there. One of the disadvantages of this particular one is that there is a danger of it having framing the problem as the teacher rather than looking at the challenges that the students are facing. So that's the second way of thinking about focusing on a goal, finding a focus. And this is drawn from some of the work of Diane Sweeney and student-centered coaching, looking at how do we look at student data to figure out what the focus might be. Diane Sweeney, she looks at a few different questions, like, is there any student work or data that can help us decide on a focus that would make the most impact with students? So this could be a pre-assessment data, it could be something else. What are the goals for student learning using the language students will ... Or what are the learning targets, I can statements that are connected to these goals? So this could be grounded in standards. This could also be based on other kinds of evidence. One of the gurus of instructional coaching, Jim Knight, who does his work out of University of Kansas, rather. He gives as an example in his book, Impact Cycle, the idea of taking a video of students in the class and using that observation of the video of the students to frame where the goal might be. Goals can also come from being strategically planned. So Stanford, like most schools, there are whole school strategic foci, or in our case right now, a central focus. We've decided that for the next few years, inclusion is going to be our primary focus. And then this gets broken down in different ways by the different divisions. So for example, differentiation is a divisional focus. So here are three different ways that our team and the coaches can be sitting down and meeting with teachers, talking with teachers about how do we find a goal for a coaching cycle. And these cycles are about 6 to 8 weeks long, and we're thinking through how can we move things forward? How can we move a teacher forward in their own goals, move the students forward in their learning targets, or further a school strategic goal? The next piece in the puzzle is to measure it. And this is going to look a little bit different depending on what the goal is. But the idea is that if we're looking at a 6 to 8 week cycle, we want to know, have we reached the goal? How are we going to know if we reached the goal? So the Dynamic Learning Project and Google certified coaching, they measure the starting point using what they call the Indicators of Impactful Technology Use, or ITU. And they, I think this comes from, my understanding, this comes from the work of Digital Promise. And there are 6 different indicators of impactful tech use. So students being able to select their technology, collaboration skills, communication skills, creativity, innovation, critical thinking, and agency. And then in the impactful use survey, they actually have a rubric where they're looking at 2 things: frequency and proficiency. So how often do, for example, students get to select their tools from almost never to almost daily? And how proficient are they at it? They can't do it to they're very good at it. So this is not sort of it's a snapshot in time, but it's looking at a general picture. It's not focused on a particular lesson, but it's looking at, if a general assessment of where the students are at. Well, when we looked at this, one of the things that we found was that this impactful tech use rubric was very similar to the ISTE standards for students, which as a school we've already adopted, like many other schools out there. And so we asked the question, could we reframe these in terms of the ISTE standards? And we took a look at a publication from 2016, the ISTE Standards for Students ebook. And in that ebook, there's something called an age band articulation, where they take these different standards like empowered learner and digital citizen, and they break down the strands by age. So you can see, well, what does this look like for kids, in this case, from kindergarten 1 up through 1st or 2nd grade. So maybe with guidance from an educator, students are considering and setting personal learning goals and utilizing appropriate tech that will demonstrate knowledge and reflection of process. So at the age of 4, it's totally appropriate to have that guidance from an educator. And then that scaffolding gradually drops away as you get to the older age band articulation standards. So what we did was we took this age band articulation and we turned it into a Google form, so that instead of asking about frequency and proficiency for the impactful uses of technology, we asked them about these age band articulators. Coming to the next one, investigate. Investigating strategies. So the Dynamic Learning Project put together this really cool strategy menu. You can see the link there. We combined that with our own tech toolkit. So in the strategy menu here, the idea is you begin with the pedagogy and then you start to look for tools that will support that. The other way to look at it is to look at some of the tools that can perhaps inspire pedagogy. Now, we're of the belief that both of these approaches have valid purposes. The technology needs to be paired with the pedagogy, and often the pedagogy comes first, but sometimes people don't even realize what kinds of pedagogical processes are possible now, because they're not aware of what the technology can do. We also look to stories, whether it's on Twitter or on YouTube, and these are additional strategies that we point teachers to in order to find inspiration. Implement and improve. This is step 3 of our cycle. So we started, step 1 was focus. As part of focus, we took a measure of where we're at. Stage 2 in the cycle is to investigate. Stage 3 is implement and improve. This is the longest part of the cycle. So as I said before, each of these coaching cycles usually takes about 6 to 8 weeks. And it involves a cadence of a planning meeting, visiting, being in the classroom with the teacher, and then some sort of reflection meeting. Now you can combine the planning and reflection meetings into one at times, but sometimes it's also helpful to make those distinct. So Google Certified Coaching provides 6 different Google Doc templates. You can take a look at the link here and make copies of those materials if you'd like. We've added to that with our own toolkit of observational tools. One of my favorites is an iPad app called Equity Maps, where you can arrange the class, and as in a class discussion, you simply tap who is talking, and it will record and give you analytics about who may be dominating the conversation, equity between boys and girls, and a whole lot more. So this is one of the things that a coach, for example, could do to support a teacher in developing better conversations, or a teacher who is interested in promoting equity in their class. Another tool that we use during this part of the phase, the implement and improve, is called ConnectHub, connecthub.io. And this is a tool that allows coaches to add a quick interaction where they just put in some notes and then they can tag their interactions in different ways. And then principals in their building can get analytic information on what sorts of conversations are happening with which departments, on which topics. ConnectHub also allows for the creation of goals for particular teachers. So if you, when you're entering in a coaching cycle, you can log that into ConnectHub, and then you can keep track of the coaching cycles as well as the individual interactions that go into those cycles and elsewhere. And then the final stage of reflect, because part of the coaching cycle, part of design thinking, is about improving our practice in a metacognitive sense, thinking about the coaching process and how we can get better as coaches, thinking about the teaching process, how we can get better as teachers, measuring that, reflecting on our experience. So what we've done is created a little Google form, what we're calling the End of Digital Learning Coaching Cycle. And it's just asking simple sorts of questions like, on a Likert scale, 4-part Likert scale, was I able to find time with my coach? Was he able to find time with me? Were students more engaged with learning? Was the teacher more engaged in teaching? Students benefited from the coaching, and I grew professionally. And then some qualitative pieces. Both what worked, how different parties benefit, and how can we make it better in the future. We also would take that as a point to do another assessment of student learning. Now, these ISTE student snapshots, those don't always work because if it's a teacher-focused goal, for example, it may not have a direct outcome in terms of ISTE standards, but where applicable, it's great to measure and see what sort of progress the students made with that. So again, 6 different pieces, and this is our main takeaway, that Google Certified Coaching is really about identifying a few different practices that can fit together like a puzzle. And my challenge to you is to think about what practices currently exist at your school, which of these pieces might be new, and perhaps that you add to your puzzle, and which puzzle pieces do you currently have in place at your school where perhaps the Google coaching model isn't as much about adding new pieces as finding a new way of connecting the dots within what you're currently doing. Thanks. If you have any questions, send me a tweet. My handle is TeacherTechPaul. You can also send me an email, paul.swanson@sais.edu.sg. I'd love to hear about how this connects with work that you're doing at your school, and hope you have a wonderful day.